I showed up early on Christmas with a casserole that took me 3 hours and every hope I had left. The porch was glowing new wreath, new lanterns, the kind of expensive pretty that makes you feel poor just for looking at it. I knocked. The door opened a crack. A face I love. A tone I didn't recognize. "Go home," he said. "She wants only important people today. Only important people." The word important burned hotter than the December wind slicing through my coat. I stood there holding my dish like a ticket that suddenly wasn't valid. Laughter floated from inside. Clinking glasses. The soundtrack of a family I apparently wasn't in. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I walked back down the steps with the kind of posture you borrow from your grandmother when you refuse to break in public. I set the casserole on the passenger seat and drove in silence because a single carol would have shattered me. Morning, my phone lit up with his name. "Hey, I need the keys to the beach house." The beach house. The place I scraped for. The place I bled weekends for. The place I bought to stitch a life back together after the world split. I stared at the screen long enough to hear the second ring. Third, fourth. My hand was steady when I answered. His wasn't when he asked again, "Can you drop them off today?" "We want to redecorate before the honeymoon." Redecorate. I took one breath, counted to 5, and said the 5 words he will never forget. "If you've ever been told you're not important in your own family, stay with me." Because what came next wasn't a scene, it was a ledger, a lock, a lesson. And by the time Christmas lights came down, so did the illusion of who owned what and who mattered. I stood on the porch at 5:30 sharp December wind, slipping under my coat like a cold hand. I am Lydia Hale, widow mother, and the voice you're hearing. I'd spent weeks rehearsing a simple evening, arrive early, bring a casserole. Stay pleasant, leave room for grace. The lights were magazine perfect. A new wreath gold, ribbon lanterns that looked like they cost more than my first car payment. I smoothed the foil over the dish and told myself to breathe. Holidays can bruise, but they can also heal. I wanted the second thing. I wanted proof that time softens edges, that grown children circle back to the people who raised them. Behind the glass, shadows moved. Laughter bubbled up, easy, warm, the kind that hurts to hear when you're still outside. I straightened my shoulders the way my mother taught me when life gets petty and reached for the bell. The door latch clicked, and in that little metal sound, something old woke up. The door opened just a few inches. There he stood, Bram Hale, my adult son, a public school teacher with kind eyes I used to trust. Tonight, those eyes were guarded like a clerk at closing time. He didn't step aside. He didn't reach for the casserole. "What are you doing here?" he asked, careful and cold, the way people talk when they've practiced the line. I blinked because we had planned this. Same day, same time. I'd confirmed it twice to avoid exactly this feeling. I said dinner. He didn't move. He didn't even look over his shoulder. Behind him, I heard glasses clink, a baby laugh, the quiet music of belonging. I tried to smile my way in the way mothers do, gentle, a little foolish, hopeful anyway. His jaw set. He slid the door 2 inches closer to the jamb. Not yet a slam, but close enough to count as a warning shot. I kept it practical. "We talked last week," I said, like facts could fix feelings. "I'm early, but only by 20 minutes. He stared past me as if the porch rail were saying something more interesting. Inside, someone called a toast. The crowd answered in one voice, the chorus you can only get from people who expect to be welcome. The house itself felt new, fresh paint, expensive garland, the kind of curated calm that takes money or a mood board. I did the math and came up short on a teacher's salary. Not my business, I told myself. Not tonight. I lifted the casserole slightly, a peace offering with crispy onions and memory baked in. "You used to ask for this," I said. He glanced at the dish like it was a mistake delivered to the wrong address. "There's been a change," he said. "We're keeping it small, small. In a house full of voices, the word tasted like tin." I asked who decided small. That's when her name arrived. Mason Vale, his fiancé. Cosmetic white smile, big plans, bigger certainty. We've met. She's organized, aspirational, the sort who color codes calendars and relatives. He said she wants it perfect. I said perfect doesn't mean cruel. He didn't answer. He shifted his weight like a security guard preparing to escort a stranger. Memory flashed the little boy who used to bring me dandelions in a fist, asking if weeds count as flowers when you love them enough. I lifted the foil. Just a taste, then I'll go. He shook his head. Please don't start. I'd only brought dinner and good shoes. From the hallway came a laugh I didn't recognize, followed by that gentle hush people use before a prayer. In a family story, this is the scene where someone steps forward to bridge the gap. No one did. Instead, the space between us widened until I could feel the draft. Then came the sentence that lands like a stamp on your forehead. Go home, he said, voice low and firm. Only important people today. It wasn't the words alone. It was who said them and how easily they arrived, like he'd practiced in the mirror. Important. I tasted it once, twice, the way you test bad milk. I backed down one stair because pride is slippery on ice. I kept my chin high because grief is heavier when strangers watch. He didn't offer an apology or a plate for the road. He closed the door to a careful crack enough to let the warmth brush my face like a refusal. Behind it, a timer chimed and someone cheered. For a moment, I saw myself from the street. A woman with a dish and no invitation, pretending the wind was the reason her eyes watered. The latch clicked again. This time it sounded final, like a checkmark on a list. I carried the casserole to my car, the way you carry bad news, steady hands, shallow breath. On the passenger seat, it felt too hot, like it understood what had happened and was embarrassed for us all. I turned the radio off before the first bell could jingle. Christmas carols don't forgive quickly. The drive was muscle memory, left at the vet, right at the diner that still serves pie like a promise. I passed families hauling trees, kids arguing over whose turn it was to put the angel on top. Ordinary joy. I let the traffic lights decide how long I sat with it. Red to consider, green to move yellow, to rehearse the sentence. I refused to text, I'm fine. Home greeted me with a dark window and a wreath I'd made from last year's ribbon. I carried the dish inside and set it on the counter. The foil hissed when I peeled it back. Like it too was tired of pretending. My living room looked like a postcard someone forgot to mail. A small tree, 3 ornaments that matter, and a strand of lights that blinked like it had opinions. I stood there still in my coat, wondering when I'd shifted from mother to manageable complication. I thought about the first Christmas after the funeral, when a neighbor left a casserole and a note that said, "You don't have to be brave to be loved." I wasn't brave tonight. I was careful not to argue on the porch, careful not to drive angry, careful not to call and ask, who decided I'm unimportant? That word clung to my throat like smoke. I made tea and didn't drink it. I checked my phone and didn't message anyone. In the stillness, the house made old house sounds. A heater cough, a pipe complaint, a floorboard settling like a sigh. Somewhere between those noises, a question rose. When did I become optional? The phone didn't ring, so the past did. Grief has a way of turning on the projector when you refuse to sleep. On the wall of memory, I saw Gareth Hale, my late husband, broad-shouldered and tender, the man who taught me how to balance a checkbook and a bad day. When he died, I was 38, with a 12-year-old, and a wallet that rattled like a tambourine. People brought food and promises. Then they stopped, because that's how it goes. I asked the hospital for more hours, and took them because that's how it goes too. I learned the language of bills, due past, due paid. I learned how to fix a leaky faucet and a lonely Friday. I learned which coupons weren't worth the drive. Somewhere in there, I learned that showing up early with a casserole is a love letter, which is why tonight hurt exactly where it did. Love letters shouldn't bounce. Work became the rope I climbed. The county hospital needed hands, so I gave them. Mine days, nights, the odd Sunday afternoon, when families posed for photos without me. I borrowed books from the library about simple investing, not because I had much, but because I needed hope to compound. I packed lunches, mended hems, drove a car that coughed through winters with more grit than grace. I remember rolling coins on the coffee table, the paper tubes like tiny goals you could hold. Older women taught me tricks. Freeze stale bread, stretch soup with beans. Keep a rain jar for small joys like a matinee ticket or a beach day. Years blurred, but receipts don't lie. Neither do habits. Money isn't love, but it can build a landing. And I wanted a place that felt like landing a corner of the world where my son could breathe and I could hear the ocean answer back. 6 years ago, I founded a tired little house, 2 hours from home, shingles sulking porch, splintered view perfect. The bank called it a foreclosure. I called it a future. I signed papers with a hand that shook and a spine that didn't. On weekends, I became my own crew, scraped paint, learned tile. From online videos, sanded floors until the sander and I shared a heartbeat. I kept receipts in a shoebox because I wanted proof that sweat counts. The first night I slept there, the wind tested every window, and the ocean said, "You're not leaving." I named it the beach house, but what I meant was sanctuary. I imagined birthdays and little feet and big laughter and a long table where forgiveness could sit down and eat. I imagined holidays that didn't hurt. The house didn't ask for much, just work respect, and a woman willing to begin again. I did. Morning arrived with the kind of light that forgives blinds you forgot to dust. My phone buzzed across the counter like it had somewhere better to be. His name. I let it ring once, twice, because silence is sometimes the only bargaining chip you have left. I answered. "I need the keys to the beach house," he said, like ordering takeout. "No, hello, no." "How was your night? Just keys." Honeymoon plans, redecoration ideas, a timeline that assumed my calendar existed to hold his. I looked at the dish on the counter, a poor witness, and said nothing for a beat. "Today would be great," he added. Great. The word did somersaults it didn't deserve. I pictured the porch, the door, that sentence about important people. Something inside me slid into place, quiet and solid like a drawer, finally finding its track. "Before we talk keys," I said, "we need to talk about ownership." He laughed because people do when they're nervous, or when they think they're right. "It's family property," he said, comfortable as a man, quoting a rule he didn't read. Family. I tasted the word to see if it still meant what I was taught. A parade of moments marched by, report cards on the fridge. Scraped knees, late-night talks, rent checks, tuition deadlines, the sound of my knees cracking as I stood from a paint tray. I said, "Whose name is on the deed?" He went quiet long enough to make me wonder who had done the math for him. "We're family," he repeated slower, like it might turn into law if he pronounced it carefully. The kettle clicked off behind me. The house held its breath with me. "Then we should start acting like it," I said, because last night I learned what that word doesn't cover. Today you'll learn what it doesn't buy. I kept my voice steady and laid out the facts the way you lay tools on a workbench. "Your father, Gareth Hale, died when you were 12. We rented until you graduated. The beach house isn't inherited. It was purchased by me, fixed by me, and paid for by me." On my end of the line, the kettle clicked off. On his end, nothing but breath. Silence stretches time. For parents my age, silence is the space where we remember every shift we picked up, every field trip we missed, every bill that didn't bounce, because we refused to let it. I pictured rolled coins on a coffee table, library books, about investing with cracked spines, and my name alone on a paper titled Deed. I wasn't lecturing, I was labeling shelves. He said nothing. I let the quiet work. Older adults know this. There's a moment when truth lands, you can hear it. It doesn't thud, it locks. On the second breath, the realization surfaced. Bram Hale had been living in a story someone else told. I could almost see the sentences, family property. How it's always been. Useful myths are warm blankets until you try to pay the mortgage with them. As he stalled, I felt an old ache many parents will recognize, the gap between what we taught and what was learned. I remembered permission slips I signed with a lunchbox in one hand and a pen in the other, the tiny ways we cushion life so our kids don't feel the price tag. Now the bill had arrived in a different currency respect. When he finally spoke, the words were thin. I didn't know. I said, "You didn't ask." It wasn't cruelty. It was a door gently closed on an old habit. In that small correction, I felt something sharpen inside me. Love, yes, but love with edges. Then came his fix. People offer paperwork when they're out of apologies. Bram Hale suggested he could rent the beach house, write a check, keep the plan, avoid the fight. To him, it sounded reasonable. To me, it sounded like putting a price on an open wound. I've been a landlord to strangers. I won't be one to my child to make rudeness look respectable. I pictured him handing keys to Mason Vale, posing for photos on a deck. I sanded by hand, telling guests how our family keeps a place by the water. No, that's not a lease. That's a lie with a receipt. I said, this isn't about money. It's about meaning. He didn't see the difference yet. That happens sometimes, especially to good people, rushing toward milestones. But older hearts know if you pay with dignity, you overpay. I ended the call with a promise to call back. I meant after thinking. I meant after changing. When I hung up, a cool clarity filled the room the way evening air does after a storm, windows, cracked curtains, lifting house, finally breathing again. I poured the tea I hadn't touched and let it warm my hands instead of my mouth. In that small pause, I remembered advice from an older nurse. Never make big decisions while angry. Make them when your spine is calm. Mine was. I looked around my kitchen lists on the fridge magnets, from road trips taken on purpose, not on credit, and decided the next step wasn't a speech. It was a boundary. Parents in my age bracket will understand the older we get, the more we value locks that actually latch on doors on accounts on expectations. I took out a notepad and wrote 3 lines secure. The how, secure the paperwork, secure myself. The list steadied me. Resentment takes energy. Boundaries generate it. I chose the second fuel. Before paper, a knock. Beatrice Caldwell, my next-door neighbor, the kind of woman who returns measuring cups and wisdom in equal portions, stood with concern in her eyes. I hope I'm not overstepping, she said, which is how you know she never does. She told me Mason Vale had stopped by to plan a surprise, then asked how long I'd lived here, whether I still worked full-time, and if I owned other places. Beatrice has lived long enough to recognize a survey when she hears one. I told her to ask you, she said, gentle but firm, the way grandmothers pin quilts, tiny, precise, unmovable. My stomach went cold, then hot. It wasn't curiosity, it was inventory. I thanked Beatrice and walked her to the door. In the doorway, she added, "Dear, I didn't like her eyes when she asked about deeds." The words stuck to the rug like sand. Deeds, plural. I closed the door and locked it. Shock does odd chores. I found myself wiping a counter that wasn't dirty, as if a clean surface could settle a messy truth. Mason Vale had been building a spreadsheet in her mind, and I'd been feeding it without knowing. Older adults will understand that humiliation when kindness meets calculation and loses. I stood there and inventoried myself where I worked. When I worked what I owned, why I kept it quiet. The answers were simple. Work hospital, assets modest earned, silence privacy, not pride. Then the mother part of me piped up. Don't assume, verify. I opened my laptop, the old one with the sticker that says be nice. Or leave. I wasn't going to snoop. I was going to look at what Mason Vale proudly put on public display. If there was nothing, I'd find nothing. If there was story, I'd read it. The page loaded. The pictures were pretty. The prices were prettier. Her timeline told a tale. Before, Bram Hale Mason Vale posted thrift finds, chain restaurant desserts, nail colors that matched coupons. After the engagement, it was designer handbags, resort weekends, and dinners where the bill comes folded inside leather. People change, incomes rise, but I know paychecks and I know patterns. My son is a teacher. Her job as a hygienist is honest work. Together, they could afford joy. But this was runway joy. Caption after caption hinted at family blessings, legacy, Doing things the smart way. Older listeners will feel it too. The shift from gratitude to entitlement is small and loud. I clicked stories, then comments. A repeated phrase. Future secured. I paused. Secured by what or whom? That question presses on a parent's chest the same way a toddler once did, heavy and undeniable. I scrolled again and found the clue I didn't want. It wasn't a photo. It was a clubhouse. A private group Future Wives network popped up through a tagged congratulations. I couldn't see inside, but public crumbs are enough for anyone who's ever followed a recipe. The visible posts discussed streamlining family dynamics, encouraging elders to simplify holdings and making holidays efficient. Efficient is a word that should never sit next to Christmas. A moderator named Talia Rook cheered a thread about maximizing inheritance. I felt my jaw set in a way it hasn't since HR tried to cancel lunch breaks. It wasn't jealousy, it was recognition. I know project language when I hear it: goals, timelines, deliverables. I pictured Mason Vale converting my life into bullet points with Bram Hale as the action item. In that moment, my hurt shifted. It wasn't just being left off a guest list. It was being written out of a future plan drafted in my house with my keys. The word no found its shoes. Suddenly, Christmas made awful sense. Excluding me wasn't a tantrum. It was a test. Cut the mother to cement control. If Bram Hale chose the fiancé over the parent on a holy night, then the blueprint held. Older adults know this playbook. Divide, isolate, then define normal as whatever keeps the peace. But peace without respect is just quiet. I replayed the porch scene now with subtitles. Important people equals people who don't interfere. My breath slowed. When you see the frame, the picture stops lying. I closed the laptop and looked toward the drawer where I keep spare keys and important papers. For years, I told myself love means open doors. Tonight, I learned love sometimes means changing the locks. I wasn't angry. I was awake. The beach house would not become a prop in someone else's pageant. If I was being pushed out of a story, I'd write a new chapter ink first, then iron. The next call came fast, as if the universe wanted confirmation on file. Bram Hale asked if I'd calmed down. That phrase is a match near dry brush. I let the flame die by not feeding it. How often do conversations about me with Mason Vale end up about money, property, or inheritance? I asked. There was a long inhale and a short answer. That's not fair. People say not fair when truth has cornered them gently. I said, I'm not accusing. I'm auditing. Older viewers know the difference. One is heat, the other is light. He tried to move the goalposts to feelings. I moved them back to facts. Who taught you the phrase, family property? Silence again, the honest kind. Finally, I don't know, which often means I didn't notice. I ended the call kindly. You don't win these moments by shouting. You win by refusing to rent out your boundaries, even for a night. By evening, my pulse matched the clock. I did what sturdy women do. When the heart is loud, we write. I made 2 lists, what I can control, what I will no longer excuse. Under control keys, locks documents calendar. Under no longer excuse, disrespect disguised as logistics. Perfect as a reason to be cruel, and any plan that spends my name without my consent. I reached for my address book, not the phone, the old one with coffee rings and corners, turned down and found a Mara Finch-esque. We met years ago at a church fundraiser. She'd drawn up a simple will for me when the beach house was still a dream with nails. Morning, I wrote. Urgent but calm. That last phrase was for me. Older adults know the power of a night's sleep. It sands sharp edges. It also strengthens resolve. I put the book away, turned off the tree, and let the dark agree with me. Sunlight arrived like a yes. I dressed in quiet clothes that say business without apology, and drove to Amara Finch. The waiting room had the good magazines and a clock that didn't nag. When Amara appeared, she shook my hand like a person who believes women when they say, I'm fine and I'm not. We sat. I told the story, porch words, keys, research group patterns. She listened the way doctors do before they say a serious word. Then she said, "Mine ownership, not revenge, not payback. Ownership." We mapped next steps, documents, beneficiaries, contingencies, locks, practical things older adults understand because life taught us to gather receipts. Amara slid a legal pad across the desk. "Let's write how this ends," she said. I felt my shoulders drop and my breath deepen. Outside a gull screamed like a headline. Inside pens moved. Some families run on myths. Ours would run on signatures, and once ink dries, it doesn't flinch. I arrived at Amara Finch's office with a tote that had more proof than fabric deed. Copies, bank statements, tax returns, and a spiral notebook with tabs that said House Savings Investments. Amara greeted me like someone who knows the difference between anger and resolve. We sat at a table the color of wet sand, and I laid everything out in neat rows the way nurses triage supplies before the hard part begins. She listened without interrupting, the kind of listening older adults cherish because it wastes nothing. When I finished, she slid a legal pad toward me. "We'll put the story into documents," she said. The word documents felt like a door that closes and locks. I thought of porch lights and closed faces and recipes that still burn your tongue. I wasn't here to win an argument. I was here to establish a record. "Let's start with titles," Amara said. "Let's start." I answered and felt my shoulders lower for the first time in days. We wrote objectives the way you write a grocery list. When you're done playing hungry, clear, specific, no wishful thinking. Protect the beach house. Remove assumptions. Prevent unauthorized access. Amara Finch added a line I hadn't framed for myself. "Honor your labor." The words steadied me. People my age know the cost of a life because we've counted receipts and minutes. I told her my goal wasn't punishment. It was peace that wouldn't be repossessed by someone else's plans. We listed contingencies, marriage, divorce, medical emergencies, unexpected relocations. You've already made the hard choices. Amara said you just haven't written them down. She explained next steps in plain English. Gather beneficiaries, update instruments, formalize intent. Each sentence felt like a plank, extending over cold water. I didn't want to jump, I wanted a bridge. By the time we numbered the last action item, I could see the far side of life with locks that matched the doors I actually own. Paper turned into power. Amara Finch redlined my outdated will, replaced vague kindness with precise gifts, and drafted a living trust, named for Gareth Hale, not as a shrine but as a compass. "This keeps control where you intend it," she said, tapping a clause that read like a seatbelt. We updated beneficiary designations on every account, because older adults know the quiet truth your will can sing. Your beneficiaries whisper louder. We added a healthcare directive in case silence ever needs a translator. I initialed page after page, signing the past into a shape the future can't misread. Somewhere between the notarized stamp and the trust schedule, my breathing changed. It wasn't triumph, it was temperature grief cooling into granite. Amara collected the stack, bound it, and handed me a copy like a shield. "You came to draw a line," she said. "We drew it. Now you'll keep it." I nodded and for once believed myself. The next calls were practical. Dax Romero, a locksmith with 4 arms like a promise, arrived at the beach house first. He walked the perimeter the way a good contractor walks, a sentence, hands on details, eyes on the whole. "We'll rekey everything," Dax said. "Deadbolt sliders, service door, new hardware, new cores." I watched him work with the same quiet satisfaction I feel when a drawer finally slides without catching. He didn't ask why. Older tradespeople don't pry, they protect. When he finished, he placed the old keys in a zip bag like evidence from a solved case. I put the bag deep in a drawer with the instruction manuals and a mercy or two. We tested each lock twice. The click was clean, crisp, and unambiguous. It sounded like grammar. "Anything else?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "A code system." He nodded, wrote a number on his clipboard, and handed me a card. "Keypads tomorrow." I slept that night. Morning brought Keegan Holt, a security tech with a calm voice and a toolkit that zipped like a hymn. He mapped the entry points, sketched lines for sensors, and recommended a keypad with rolling codes and tamper alerts. "You'll control it from your phone," Keegan said, showing me the app. Big buttons, clear labels, no nonsense. He positioned the panel where sunlight wouldn't blind the screen and installed a camera at the path angle, not the door. Because experience teaches you to watch the approach, not just the arrival. When we tested the chime, it dinged once polite, but firm, like a librarian clearing her throat. We named the system Beach House, nothing cute, nothing inviting. Keegan ran through the checklist twice. "Choose a code you'll remember under stress," he advised. "Older adults know that number already. It's the date the world changed and you kept going." I chose mine, entered it once, twice, and felt the house exhale. I drove home with the new code stitched into my mind like a private song. I didn't tell anyone, not even my reflection. Control is a muscle you rebuild by lifting only what's yours. The phone rang before I set down my purse. "Bram Hale. We drove out to the beach house," he said, agitated breath turning words into gravel. "The locks are different. There's a keypad. What's going on?" I looked at the folded packet from Amar Finch, still warm from the printer, and answered plain. "I secured my property." He made a sound between a laugh and a scoff. People do that when they hit a rule they didn't know existed. "Why would you do that?" he asked, as if safety were an insult. I said because doors should open for the right people, for the right reasons. The line went quiet long enough for me to hear my own heart decide. "Don't play word games," Bramhale snapped, as if ownership were a pun and not a boundary. I didn't raise my voice. "Older adults know that volume is a tax we don't pay anymore." "This isn't a game," I said. "This is title maintenance taxes and liability. It's also respect." He tried a different door history. "We've always used that place," he said. "Family summers holidays." Memory is powerful, but it doesn't transfer deeds. We visited when invited, I corrected, and those invitations came from me. He exhaled hard, the universal soundtrack of a plan unraveling. I let it play. The house around me was steady, the kind of steady you earn after you choose better over bitter. So he said finally, "What are you really saying?" I gave him the smallest truth first. I will decide who enters my home. He asked for the biggest truth next without knowing it. And what about me? He wanted special treatment. History as a key, apology as a code. "I'm your son," Bram Hale said, voice softening into the place where bargaining wears a family sweater. I didn't make him beg. "You are my son," I said, which is exactly why we have to say true things. He went silent, so I kept going one careful plank after another. "You told me I wasn't important enough for Christmas. Then you asked for my keys. Those two realities can't share a lock." He accused me of being dramatic. I offered vocabulary. The word is owner. He hated it. People raised on good manners often hate accurate nouns. "What do you want?" he asked, meaning what price, what favor, what compromise. "Clarity," I answered, "and accountability." On his end, I heard footsteps, maybe pacing, maybe searching for a script. "Stop talking like a lawyer," he said. "Start listening like a son." I replied and waited. Soft doesn't cut through entitlement. Questions do. I asked one I'd never asked before. "How much do you think I'm worth?" Bram Hale stalled, startled, then started anyway. "I don't know. People say that when a number has been living rent-free in the back of their mind." I let the silence widen until it could hold the math hospital paychecks, overtime, compound interest, taxes, repairs, and the price of peace. "You've been making promises on assets you don't own," I said. "You've been planning events in a home you didn't buy." I wasn't angry. I was accurate. He tried a chuckle. It didn't fit. "Mom, this is weird." I agreed. "It got weird when my bank account became an extra on your future." He protested that I was overreacting. Older adults know when we're finally reacting exactly enough. "This is me correcting the ledger," I said, from assumption to fact, from access to permission. Then I offered the sentence that separates fantasy from policy. "Inheritance is a gift, not a right. The line went so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator decide to cycle. "What does that mean?" Bramhale asked carefully, like a man approaching a dog he's misread. "It means love is unconditional. Access is not. It means you cannot treat me as optional and my property as guaranteed." He tried to move us back into sentiment. I kept us in sense. "You're changing the rules," he said. "I'm writing them down," I answered. "That's the thing older adults learn. After enough losses, you don't need to be loud when you're legible. If you love me, show it," I added. "With respect, with behavior, not with a guest list that edits me out and a honeymoon plan that spends me." He muttered something about Mason Vale being detail-oriented. I said, "She can organize what belongs to her." I opened the legal envelope because truth is heavier when it's made of paper. "As of yesterday," I said, voice steady, the way a shoreline is steady, "you are not named in my will. Beneficiaries have been updated. A trust in Gareth Hale's name holds the beach house. My accounts are designated elsewhere." Bram Hale inhaled like a man falling into cold water. "You can't be serious. We say that when consequences arrive wearing our own decisions." I didn't raise my tone. "I am serious," I said. "Serious about peace. Serious about boundaries that don't wobble." He accused me of punishment. I offered correction and protection. He asked if this was permanent. I answered honestly. "That depends on character, not calendar." The refrigerator hummed again. The house stood with me. Somewhere a neighbor's dog barked bored and alive. "So what now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "we find out what matters more to you, me or my keys." When the call ended, I didn't shake. I poured water for a plant that thrives on neglect and thought about the strange mercy of documents. Amara Finch had given me tools. Dax Romero and Keegan Holt had given me barriers that behave. But the peace slipping into the room came from a quieter source alignment. Older adults will recognize that feeling when your outside finally matches your inside. I tidied the counter, set the envelope on a shelf at eye level, and let my gaze rest there until my pulse slowed. This wasn't about winning a standoff. It was about refusing to live on someone else's terms in a home I built. The phone stayed still. The house stayed kind. In the quiet, I heard the ocean in my memory. Not angry, just consistent. I realized something simple and radical. If love is going to live here, it will knock. If respect is coming, it will use the bell. A week later, the call came wrapped in panic. Bram Hale didn't bother with hello. Mason Vale ended the engagement. He said, voice frayed like an old cuff. He explained in bursts, plans undone, deposits lost, a future suddenly missing its labels. Older adults will recognize that tone. Not grief, not yet, but the shock that comes when a script dissolves in your hands. I let him talk until the words ran out. Then the quiet revealed the headline. "She said there's no point if the money isn't coming," he whispered, as if saying it softer made it less true. I looked at the envelope on my shelf, the one from the lawyer, and felt no triumph, only oxygen. When a room has been holding its breath, air feels like news. He asked if we could meet. I said yes, because closure by phone is a rumor. Where, he asked. Somewhere neutral, I said. Somewhere with chairs that don't remember us. Before we picked a place, Bram Hale admitted the part he'd skipped. Mason Vale, he said, had contacted Amara Finch's office, asked innocent questions, probed timelines, hinted at clarity for the future. The staff refused, of course. Boundaries respect paper as much as people. He sounded stunned that she'd go that far. Older listeners know when money becomes the glue. Even family photos can't hold. He described her last conversation, how she used words like security and smart and stability, then set them down like weights on his chest. He tried to tell himself it was about love and heard himself fail. I didn't fill the silence. Silence is where truth comes to sit, when it's tired of being chased. Finally, he said, "She knew more about your life than I did." There it was, the bruise under the bruise. "Do you hate me?" he asked. "No," I said, "but today we'll learn what loving you requires." We chose a small brick cafe owned by Nate Kincaid, a man who remembers regulars. by how they take their coffee and their pain. I arrived first and sat where the light was kind. When Bram Hale walked in, he looked older by months. Not years, the fast kind of aging that follows a hard lesson. He started to explain, but I put up a hand. "You don't owe me a speech," I said. "You owe me honesty." He nodded, swallowed, and told the whole story: Mason Vale tracking deeds, pressing for access, confusing commitment with acquisition. While he talked, I noticed small things. Older adults catch his hands, didn't reach for his phone, his eyes didn't wander to the door. He wasn't defending, he was admitting. When he finished, I said nothing. He waited. The moment stretched, then set. "Do you see it now?" I asked. "I do," he said, voice rough. "And I don't like who I've been." He said the sentence I'd needed all along. I became the person who kept my own mother on the porch. It landed between us like a heavy coat neither of us wanted to wear again. Nate Kincaid slid 2 waters to the edge of the table, the way baristas deliver mercy quietly, like it's part of the menu. Bram Hale stared at the glass and told a memory I'd forgotten the time I taped cardboard over a drafty window so he could sleep warm, the way I laughed about home improvements on a budget. He said I traded that woman for someone who wanted a photo by your ocean. Older adults will know the sting and the relief of hearing your worst night named aloud. Confession doesn't rebuild a porch, but it stops the termites. So he asked, breaking, "Is there anything left of us?" I took a breath that came from my feet. Maybe I said if we change the blueprint. I laid out the meeting rules on a napkin because paper turns good intentions into anchors. No blame ping pong, I wrote. Short, true sentences. If we talk about money, it's only to talk about meaning. Nate Kincaid dropped off coffee and a kindness, 2 extra napkins just in case. Bram Hale agreed to the rules without bargaining, a first victory you could hear. Then he handed back something I hadn't asked for the story from his side. How Mason Vale rehearsed lines with him, how family property became a catchphrase that spared him the discomfort of "I'm asking my mother." How he measured love in access and discovered it doesn't convert. Each admission clicked into place as if a messy drawer finally accepted dividers. "Why here?" he asked, looking around. "Because this room has never seen us fight," I said. "If we're going to start over, we start where the walls are neutral." He apologized without a shopping list attached. "No, but no, if no, once you. Just, I'm sorry I chose easy over kind. I'm sorry I liked feeling important more than I liked being decent." Older viewers know a clean apology when we hear it. It doesn't explain itself into a corner. Bram Hale described the cold after Mason Vale left the silence of a house that suddenly sounded like what it was, furniture without company. He said he called and almost hung up 3 times. I said I almost didn't answer. We smiled at the honesty and let it sting anyway. Then he asked a question that was really a door. "What would respect look like to you?" I told him. Invitations, not expectations. Conversations before conclusions. Showing up because of love, not leverage. He wrote it down on the napkin, each line a plank on a bridge. I wasn't sure we could cross yet. "Why meet then?" Bram Hale asked, voice level. "Because broken doesn't mean done," I said. "It means careful." I asked what he wanted. Not the beach house, not a guest list, not a clause. "A chance to rebuild," he said, "to earn my way back." The word earn changed the air. Older adults know the difference between a request and a repayment plan. Earning means time proof and the humility to repeat both. I told him what that would require: regular calls with no asks, holidays offered not assumed, boundaries treated like guardrails not suggestions. He nodded and for once didn't ask how long it would take. "As long as it takes," I said, and he accepted the only timeline that heals. Then he pushed his coffee aside and said the bravest thing I'd heard from him yet. "If we never talk about inheritance again, I'll consider that a blessing, not a loss." I set the last napkin on top of the others, like a cover page, and talked about boundaries, the way electricians talk about circuits. Clear, practical, life-saving. "A boundary isn't punishment," I said. "It's design. It tells love how to travel without burning the house down." Bram Hale listened, not like a student cramming, but like a man learning his own floor plan. We walked through examples older adults will recognize. Call before you visit. Bring your own key only when you're invited to use it. If you disagree, take a walk and return with a softer voice. He asked what happens when we mess up. We don't pretend it didn't scorch, I said. We repair it before we plug back in. He nodded and added one himself. I won't ask Amara Finch questions through anyone but you. I didn't expect that one, but it belonged on the list. The pen felt good in my hand, then he offered a promise that didn't sound like a performance. I'll call because I miss you, not because I need something. It was simple and specific, 2 qualities older hearts trust. He looked almost embarrassed by how small it sounded, like a toy pledge. But most repairs start with tiny, repeatable acts. Nate Kincaid cleared mugs and left us with warm refills and the comfortable silence of a place that's seen enough mornings to know people can change after coffee. Bram Hale said he'd handle his own bills, his own plans, his own disappointments. He wouldn't leverage my name to fix holes, he drilled himself. If I ask for help, he added, it will be help, not access. That line mattered. Access is a shortcut. Help is a handrail. I told him I could meet a son at a handrail. He smiled the small, real smile I remembered from the dandelion years. He asked about the papers. I didn't dodge. The will stays as signed, I said. The trust stays in Gareth Hale's name. Beneficiaries remain where they are. Bram Hale nodded like a man accepting weather. I understand, he said, and for once I believed him. Love isn't a transaction, I added. If it ever becomes one, it's not love, it's billing. He winced and then laughed because gallows humor is still humor. We talked about holidays ahead, not expectations but possibilities. Thanksgiving with a maybe, Christmas with a maybe. Maybes aren't weak, they're honest. He asked if he could visit the beach house someday. When the relationship can hold it, I said. He didn't push for a date. Older adults will appreciate that mercy, the patience to let a bridge cure before driving across it. We folded the napkins with our agreements like menus after a meal that finally fed us. We stood to leave. Nate Kincaid held the door, and the winter air met us like an equal, not a punishment. On the sidewalk, Bram Hale hesitated, then said, "Thank you for not slamming a door I deserved." I answered with the truth. Doors teach, locks protect, people choose. He tucked his hands into his coat and walked to his car without looking back, which is sometimes how men keep from unlearning what they just learned. I watched the cafe window catch our reflections, 2 figures the same height, different weights of history, then fade as the light shifted. Older adults know this part of the story. Nothing flashy, just the long quiet after a storm where you check the roof and the wiring, and make a list for the hardware store. The door behind me closed softly. Somewhere in town, a bell rang noon. I turned toward home, the kind that waits without keeping score. Sunday came like a soft reboot. The phone rang at 3, the hour we used to grocery shop, and Bram Hale asked about my week with no ask attached. We talked weather, a leaky faucet, a book I pretended to like in the 90s, and finally admitted I didn't. Older listeners know that's a small freedom. You can change your mind and keep your dignity. He told me he'd started walking after dinner, a loop past the elementary school, where kids play foursquare until dark. I pictured him measuring his steps against better habits. When the call ended, I realized we'd spoken 20 minutes without mentioning keys, deeds, or plans. That was the climax I needed, a conversation that didn't spend me. I set the phone down and felt the room breathe. Respect is quiet. It doesn't arrive with horns. It shows up with listening. The following Sunday, he called again, same time, same modest topics, and repetition felt like repair. My birthday landed on a Tuesday, the kind that pretends to be nothing special. The mail brought bills and catalogs until a plain envelope slid underneath, no return address, just careful handwriting. Inside was a card from Bram Hale with a note that did not audition for forgiveness. "I'm grateful for the years you carried more than groceries," it read. "I'm learning to carry my part." That sentence hit the center of the target. Older adults recognize not poetry responsibility. I stood at the counter, cake cooling on a rack, and smiled in a way my face hadn't practiced lately. The climax was small but sharp. No gift card, no hint about the beach house. Only words that didn't ask to be repaid. I put the card beside the toaster where necessary things live and called to say thank you. We kept it short on purpose. Not every good moment needs a parade. Sometimes the win is that nothing else is hidden inside. Retirement arrived the way spring arrives, in a stubborn town, slow, then all at once. I turned in my badge, hugged the night shift, and walked out of the county hospital with a tote that felt lighter than it should. The first Monday, I woke at 5 anyway, and watched the street come alive without me. By Friday, I'd signed up to volunteer at a literacy program where adults learn to read the labels that run their lives' medicine menus maps. Older adults will understand the gift giving on purpose instead of out of panic. Bram Hale called that Sunday to ask how it went. I told him about a man who sounded out exit like it was a spell and then laughed like he'd just unlocked a door. The climax wasn't applause, it was usefulness. Purpose feels different when no one grades you. That night, I stared at the calendar and saw time I didn't have to defend. Weekends used to be for catching up on what exhaustion forgot. Now I started inviting goodness in on purpose. I called Beatrice Caldwell the neighbor who can season soup and advice with the same wrist flick and asked if she wanted ocean instead of errands. She arrived with a sun hat and the kind of shoes that say, "We'll see how far we get." We drove to the beach house, and I unlocked the new keypad with fingers that didn't tremble. Beatrice walked through each room as if she were blessing it. New locks, old photos, a quilt that looks better after storms. We ate simple sandwiches on paper plates and let the waves handle the talking. The climax was a quiet one, Beatrice saying, "This is yours, dear," the way witnesses do when they confirm the reality you already feel. On the drive back, she hummed a hymn I like, and for a mile, we let contentment take the wheel. Months turned like pages you don't dog-ear, because you know you'll remember anyway. Bram Hale kept calling on Sundays, and not once did he mention Will's beneficiaries or family property. That omission became its own music, no off-key notes, no sudden key changes to money. He told me about parent-teacher conferences and how a shy student finally presented a project without staring at the carpet. I told him about a woman at the literacy class who read a recipe aloud and then made the cake, smiling like she'd just stitched her name back onto her life. The climax snuck up on me. I stopped bracing during our calls. No flinch when the topic changed, no scan for the angle. Trust doesn't return with a trumpet. It tiptoes back and sits quietly in the same chair as before. One evening, I caught myself setting aside my Sunday crossword so I wouldn't miss his ring. That felt like healing wearing slippers. The day I invited Bram Hale to the beach house. The text was short, dinner by the water, your night to pick the menu. He chose roasted chicken and green beans, an honest nod to a casserole that once stood between us, like a question. When he arrived, he parked in the correct spot without instructions, knocked, and this mattered, waited. I opened the door to a paper bag full of groceries and the smell of fresh rosemary. He said, "I'm here as a guest," and meant it. That sentence was the climax the locks had been waiting for. He washed his hands, opened cabinets only when I pointed, and asked where the good pans lived, like a man who understands that kitchens have rules. No cameras came out, no tours were offered. We cooked at a pace that allowed the past to be present without being the boss. When the timer dinged, it sounded like permission. We ate at the small table facing the window, 2 plates, cloth napkins, and the good forks I usually save. Bram Hale didn't perform apologies. He buttered bread. He didn't narrate growth. He asked if I preferred the dark meat. Older adults recognize this kind of climax, ordinary done right. After dinner, he rinsed dishes without rearranging the dishwasher like he owned it. We took a short walk to the shoreline, the wind tugging our sleeves, gulls pretending they were invited. He pointed at a distant light and asked if I could see it. I told him about the time a storm shut down the power and the house held anyway. We didn't name the metaphor out loud. Back inside, he wiped the counter where he'd cooked, left the kitchen better than he found it, and said, "Thank you for sharing your space. No entitlement, no angle." Just the sentence I'd been waiting years to hear, said right. We carried chairs onto the deck like people who've practiced working in tandem. The sunset went about its business, painting the water without asking our opinion. Bram Hale told me he'd started a woodworking hobby again, simple shelves, a coffee table for his living room. "It helps to measure twice," he said, smiling at the obvious lesson. I told him I'd learned to do less and enjoy it more, which, for my generation, counts as rebellion. The climax was a quiet exchange. He asked if he could bring his tools next time to fix a stubborn drawer inside. "Only if you let me pay you in pie," I said. He laughed, not the nervous kind, the real kind that lands in the chest and stays. We didn't plan the next holiday. We planned a drawer. Sometimes that's how families keep from snapping one hinge. One evening, one small promise kept when the wind picks up. When the sky went to copper, Bram Hale rested his arms on the railing and spoke softer than the waves. "I want to be worthy of your love," he said, not confident. "I can spend it." For older adults, that's the sentence you want. Once in a lifetime, said by someone who finally understands the economy of care. It was the climax I hadn't dared to script. I didn't answer right away. Good words deserve room. We stood there letting the water read itself onto the sand. Then I said what I mean, love isn't a prize. It's a practice. Show up for it. He nodded, eyes clear, no bargaining behind them. A gull screamed like a bad joke, and we laughed, because timing still has a sense of humor. Inside, the clock chimed 8, the time my late husband used to call reasonable. It felt reasonable to believe in improvement again, not perfection, just the honest attempt. Before he left, Bram Hale reached for his coat and paused, waiting for cues, guest behavior learned, not faked. I handed him leftovers because that's love's dialect in my house. At the door, he said, "Thank you for the boundaries." Older listeners know that's not something people say when they're young. It's a sentence you earn after touching an electric fence. The climax was my reply. "They're the bridge now, not the wall." He understood. We stood in the entryway the way people do when goodbyes feel less like endings and more like stitches. He promised to text when he got home. I believed he would. After the taillights disappeared, I walked the rooms. Once habit, not fear, checking the new locks that no longer announce themselves as guards, only as doormen with good posture. The house hummed its steady hum. I washed 2 plates and 1 memory, and both came clean. That night, sleep found me without bargaining. No recap, no courtroom, no rewrite. Just a woman under a quilt hearing a familiar ocean and not bracing for the next wave. In the morning, Beatrice Caldwell texted a photo she took of me yesterday, laughing with a paper cup of coffee and the shoreline at my shoulder. "You look like someone who knows where her keys are," she wrote. That line felt like a benediction. The climax was internal. I realized I no longer rehearsed speeches for Bram Hale in the shower. I didn't need to. The story had shifted from defense to design. Later, I sat with my volunteer binder penciled in next week's lessons and left a blank square on Sunday at 3. Habit, yes, but now also hope. The beach house stood where it always has, but the person inside it had changed. The doorbell would ring again, and when it did, it would be the right sound. This is the ledger. After all, a door slammed shut at Christmas. A sturdy door at the beach and a bunch of keys I finally learned to keep. I protected what I had built so that love could return. Without cost, and he learned that affection can't be squandered like a gift card. The locks did their job, so did the boundaries. We didn't rewrite the past, we reshaped the future. Now the house is truly quiet, and the phone rings for the right reasons. If there's a lesson, it's simple: protect first, then invite. Teach in writing, forgive with time. I'm not looking for heroes or villains. I'm looking for mature individuals who choose to fix rather than exploit. If you're standing on that porch with a meal and a strong will, what would you do? Type boundaries if you want to stand your ground. Type second chance if you want to open a door. Add your city. I want to see how far this story spreads. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to my channel.